So dudes, the new year just started, and I know I'm behind on covering newer Warframes, but you know who's never behind? Volt. Volt is the most versatile Warframe in my opinion, and his age never slows him down. I want to start this new year right, with a frame that will never lose relevance and continues to be a fan favorite. For baby Tenno and veteran Tenno alike, Volt makes the battlefield his playground and his enemies temporary playthings. I have 10 builds today, so there's no use in wasting time. Let's get started. Before covering the builds, let's go over Volt's abilities. If you're already aware of how Volt's abilities work, please feel free to skip to the build section. Volt's passive is known as Static Discharge. Traveling along the ground between Volt's attacks by walking, running, or sliding will build up static energy, adding bonus electricity damage towards Volt's next weapon attack or ability cast. For every 1 meter traveled, 10 points of electricity damage are added, accumulating to a maximum of 1000 bonus damage. It does not combine with single elements or elemental mods on weapons. The bonus electricity damage type remains separate. It is not affected by damage mods or elemental mods, but it is affected by critical hits and the combo counter of sniper rifles. Even with multi-shot, only a single hit will gain the damage bonus. Finally, it does not affect Helminth injected abilities or shocking speed sparks. Shock is Volt's first ability. On cast, Volt expends 15 energy to fire an electrical arc at the aiming reticle with infinite cast range, dealing 200 electricity damage with 100% electricity status chance, chaining to enemies within 15 meters of each point of contact up to 5 total chain links. Shock's chaining requires line of sight and does not bypass the environment. Shock can be used while performing many actions without interrupting them, including reloading. Casting Shock through Electric Shield electrifies it, causing enemies that pass through the barrier to take 100% of Shock's damage. Volt's passive damage bonus can also be added to this electrified hit. Finally, casting Shock on a target currently affected by discharge causes an overcharge burst centered on that target. Volt's second ability is Speed, and it is his most iconic. On cast, Volt expends 25 energy to buff himself and allies within 25 meters for 12 seconds, granting 75% movement speed, 75% melee attack speed, and 25% reload speed. The attack speed and reload speed buffs are additive with other modifiers, while the movement speed is multiplicative with other movement speed effects. Allies can backflip to remove speed if they want to opt out of the bonus. Speed increases the distance of certain movement maneuvers like sliding, rolling, and wall running due to the faster sprint speed. And finally, it can be used while performing many actions without interrupting them, such as reloads, and can be recast while active. Next is Electric Shield. On cast, Volt expends 50 energy to deploy a 6 meter by 4.25 meter barrier for 25 seconds that blocks enemy fire. Shots fired through it by Volt and allies gain 50% electricity damage and 100% critical multiplier. Up to 6 shields can be cast at once, casting beyond the cap removes the oldest. The crit multiplier bonus doesn't stack with multiple shields, and is applied after other crit damage sources, multiplying them. The 50% electricity damage is an additive bonus to base damage, like an elemental mod, and stacks additively when firing through multiple shields. That electricity bonus stays separate and won't combine with other elements into secondary elements. Volt can also pick up one shield to carry as a 2 meter by 3 meter mobile frontal barrier that faces the camera and can ragdoll enemies on contact. Only one can be equipped. Transference unequips it, and while carrying it, Volt can't gain energy from sources like squad energy restores. Electric Shield doesn't buff normal melee swings, but projectile-based melee attacks can benefit. For AoE weapons, the main projectile must pass through the shield to get the bonuses, and shooting from behind the shield can also prevent self-stagger from AoE blasts. Finally, there's Discharge. On cast, Volt spends 100 energy to release an electric pulse with a 20 meter radius for 4 seconds. Enemies hit by the initial pulse, or those who enter the area during it, are stunned for 6 seconds and start emitting arcs that shock nearby hostiles within 8 meters, dealing 600 electricity damage every half second. Discharge doesn't need line of sight and passes through the environment. There's a 4.5 second damage delay before ticks start. If an affected enemy isn't near other hostiles, they'll start damaging themselves after that delay. If the stun ends before 4.5 seconds, they may take no damage at all. Falloff applies to Discharge's damage, arc damage, and stun. 100% at the cast point, scaling down linearly to 50% at max range. The arc damage does not fall off within each enemy's 8 meter arc radius, only based on the enemy's distance within the discharge range. Volt's passive affects discharge by reducing the 4.5 second damage delay, making damage start sooner, but only for the first target or object the propagation hits. Everyone else uses the normal delay. Casting Shock on a target affected by Discharge triggers an overcharge burst centered on said target. Discharge has a 1 second cast time, and can't be recast during the 4 second pulse, and recasting won't refresh enemies already affected. Let's cover the game loop. I'll make this super simple. Run fast, eat ass. Cast Speed to run super fast and receive a chunky bonus to movement speed, reload speed, and melee attack speed. Use Electric Shield to block incoming enemy fire and increase outgoing damage from guns. Shock is primarily used to immobilize enemies and set them up for easy headshots temporarily. Otherwise, it is used with its augment Shock Trooper, which adds heavy electric damage to weapons. Cast Discharge to nuke rooms of enemies and crowd control them for much easier kills. It also has an augment called Capacitance, which converts damage done by the ability to shields and overshields for survivability. Use Discharge when encountering new groups or when in a pinch and to get the upper hand. For builds with Helminth abilities, those specific cases will be covered more in the build section. In general though, keep damage buffing abilities active at all times for the best results in missions. Rinse and repeat. Onto the main Warframe builds. For Prime Warframes, I recommend using 3 Omniforma, one in the Aura slot, one in the Exile slot, and one in the main build section for the best amount of flexibility. You can always use more if you enjoy having a high level of build diversity, or you can be like me and Omniforma every slot on a Warframe. I don't recommend you do this, I'm just done. As usual, the first build is a budget non-Helminth setup. Growing Power and Power Drift boost ability strength alongside Intensify. Continuity extends all ability durations so you can recast less often. Flow pushes Volt Prime's energy up to 600, which is plenty for multiple casts, even without relying on orb drops. Streamline improves efficiency, letting you spam Electric Shield and Discharge when you need it. Stretch increases discharge range for better crowd control and room clears. Rolling Guard adds iframes plus Status Cleanse, making Volt much harder to kill. Shock Trooper upgrades Shock. Holding the cast sends out a wave that buffs you and nearby allies with extra electricity damage on all attacks. That bonus doesn't combine with unpaired elements, which makes it especially good for consistent damage over time setups. It's a strong, team-friendly damage boost and still performs well even in Steel Path. Capacitance is a discharge augment, converting 3% of discharge damage into shields, split between Volt and allies. It's a big survivability boost and excellent for team support. Now for the second build, which is the first on steroids. The Aura and Exilus stay the same, though you can swap them depending on your preference or mission type. Prime Continuity and Prime Flow replace the normal versions, pushing duration to 155% and max energy to 855. Equilibrium takes the slot that Streamline used to fill, because when you pair it with Synth Deconstruct, energy problems are almost a non-issue. For strength, Umbral Intensify does most of the heavy lifting. For range, Archon Stretch gives the same range as regular Stretch, but adds bonus. Electricity ability damage can trigger 2 energy per second for 5 seconds, helping you keep your casts rolling. Finally, Rolling Guard, Shock Trooper, and Capacitance stay in the build to round it out with extra survivability, team support, and damage. Now let's begin with the Helminth builds. This first setup is built to finish capture and exterminate missions fast. Roar is subsumed over Shock since Shock Trooper is overkill for squishier targets in short runs. Discharge stays as an emergency button for wide area crowd control. Growing Power remains for extra ability strength, but you can swap it to Sprint Boost if you just want raw movement speed. Preparation gives you the energy to instantly cast Roar, Speed, and Electric Shield at mission start. Prime Continuity, Prime Flow, and Streamline keep casting smooth and cheap over the short mission loop. Blind Rage adds enough strength to offset Overextended's penalty. Archon Stretch plus Overextended push ability range to make Shocking Speed more effective. Constitution adds more duration and improves knockdown recovery. Shocking Speed is the key augment. While Speed is active, moving near enemies applies electricity damage and status, and this effect also applies to allies. With higher range, the aura is bigger, so it's easier to tag enemies, great for locking down Steel Path crowds, and in low-level missions, it can straight up delete them as you sprint past. On to build 4, which is a full speed build. Discharge gets replaced with Infested Mobility. You can take it anywhere if you're determined enough, but it shines most on open tile sets, and it's at its best in open worlds for fast rotations between objectives. There are no augments here, just raw speed, the kind Gauss mains respect. Growing Power is the aura pick for extra ability strength, since strength scales both speed and Infested Mobility. Rush boosts sprint speed, but you can swap it for Prime Sure-Footed if you don't want knockdowns killing your momentum. For duration, Prime Continuity, Narrow-Minded, and Constitution crank the build up to 322% ability duration, so speed and Infested Mobility last for a good while. Blind Rage, Transient Fortitude, Augur Secrets, and Umbral Intensify stack more strength to push your movement speed even higher, and Rolling Guard is your emergency iframe button. Infested Mobility is a star. Its movement speed bonus is multiplicative with Volt Speed, which is why the setup hits so hard. Other Helminth options like Molt can work, but they don't make Gauss players nervous the same way. Now we return to a more mission-oriented loadout. Desiccation replaces Shock because we're running Desiccation's Curse. The augment gives Desiccation a 100% chance to summon a Swarm Kavat when you kill a blinded enemy with the finisher. That lets Volt build up to 5 Sand Kavats swarming the area. They also can benefit from Shocking Speed. Most of the setup stays close to the non-Helminth build, using the usual core mods to push duration, range, and strength. Equilibrium keeps Desiccation spammable so you can stack Kavats quickly, and Archon Stretch procs off of Shocking Speed, making energy sustain basically effortless. The Kavat's damage is surprisingly high, but it feels bugged. It doesn't scale with mission level, which is a downside and something DE could potentially change later. Next we have the Elite Sanctuary Onslaught farming build or General Nuke build. I wouldn't bring it into true scaling content because Discharge shines in lower level missions and tops out at around base Steel Path at best. For Helminth we subsume Shock for Terrify. Terrify strips armor, which directly helps Discharge hit harder and clean up faster. Growing Power stays for the extra strength, boosting both Discharge damage and Terrify's armor strip. Cutting Drift stacks more range alongside Archon Stretch and Overextended, widening Discharge's coverage. Transient Fortitude and Umbral Intensify add just enough strength to counter Overextended's downside, but the trade-off is that Overextended can prevent Terrify from full stripping armor in a single cast, so you may need multiple casts or more strength if you want to one-tap strip. Now let's begin covering the endurance setups. This endurance setup drops discharge and replaces it with Roar, Zada's Whisper, or Nourish depending on your weapons. For simplicity, Roar is the default pick since it fits most loadouts and pairs well with Shock Trooper. This build leans hard on shield gating. Brief Respite is the aura for active shield recharge, and Prime Sure-Footed keeps knockdowns from ruining runs. For stats, Umbral Intensify covers the strength you need, and Narrow-Minded makes Volt's buffs last long enough to feel comfortable. Equilibrium handles energy over time when paired with some Deconstruct and Xmas kills, letting you break even on casting. Rolling Guard gives emergency iframes, and together with catalyzing shields, Vigilante Vigor, and Fast Deflection, you can change shield refreshes into repeated windows of invulnerability. Shock Trooper stays in to add a big chunk of electricity damage for weapon scaling. Onto the helmet choices. Roar is the all-purpose damage amp, and it can double dip with damage over time, which is perfect with Shock Trooper and Electric Shield. Zada's Whisper is another strong option, especially with blast focus weapons, but it usually wants a faction mod to really shine. Nourish is the comfort pick. It gives free viral priming, stagger upon being hit, and energy multiplication. Onto the next endurance build. This version subs out Shock for Roar, Zada's Whisper, and Nourish, and because we drop Shock, we also drop Shock Trooper and run Capacitance instead, turning Discharge into your main defensive tool. Growing power comes back since Capacitance now handles your active shield gating. Prime Sure-Footed stays, so getting ragdolled by cracked out Xmas units doesn't end the run. Core staples are still here. Prime Continuity and Prime Flow for duration, and a big energy pool. Equilibrium scales extremely well into endurance missions because Xmas spawns get frequent, keeping your economy stable. Umbral Intensify gives clean ability strength with no downsides like Blind Rage or Transient Fortitude. For range, Archon Stretch and Augury Reach expand discharge coverage, letting it hit more enemies, and that also means more shields gained through Capacitance. Finally, Rolling Guard is your panic button for iframes plus Status Cleanse, which is huge for things like Heat, Toxin, and Electricity procs. Build 9 is going to be considered non-conformist, but hear me out. For this build, speed will be taken off, for your choice of Roar, Zada's Whisper, or Nourish. The aura is flexible, growing power, or even sprint boost can be swapped in. Prime Sure-Footed stays on the build to prevent knockdowns. Prime Continuity and Prime Flow are on the build to increase the duration of all buffs, and make spam cast of Discharge feasible. Rolling Guard provides status cleansing from damaging status procs, which are the only weakness of this build. Equilibrium and Archon Stretch pad out energy issues, and Umbral Intensify bridges the ability strength gap. Shock Trooper provides heavy weapon damage buffs, which is compounded with either Roar, Zada's Whisper, or Nourish, and Electric Shield. Capacitance keeps Volt and his teammates alive throughout the mission, and makes shield gating easier than breathing. I know this build is going to be controversial thanks to subsuming speed off, and admittedly it feels weird at first. However, I got used to it and I like it a lot, so give it a shot and let me know what you think. I don't know who's still running these, but here's an Eidolon Hunter setup. Eclipse replaces Discharge because it's a clean, straightforward damage buff, and Discharge is basically dead weight in hunts. Preparation lets you instantly cast speed when you hit the planes, so hopping into speed and then into Arcwing feels smooth. For stats, Narrow-Minded, Umbral Intensify, and Blind Rage give you the duration and strength you need to juice weapon damage and keep buffs up. Energy Nexus covers energy sustain over time, so you're not constantly scraping for orbs. Defensively, Adaptation adds enough bulk to eat hits from missiles and Vonvalists, helping cover for not running Capacitance here. Prime Sure-Footed stays, so knockdowns don't slow the hunt to a crawl. Vigorous Swap is a nice little damage bump for your weapon, and Shock Trooper adds electricity damage. There's one important note. Shock Trooper no longer combines into Radiation, and I thought so because I haven't run these in so long. If you want Radiation for Eidolons, mod it onto the weapon itself. Volt has a good amount of primary arcane options and a plethora of secondary options for loadout specifics. The primary arcane options for Volt are Arcane Aegis, Arcane Concentration, Arcane Energize, Molt Augmented, and Molt Efficiency. Arcane Aegis is primarily used on the Gunboat Endurance build. Because that build lacks discharge and its linked augment capacitance, shield survivability is lacking. Using Arcane Aegis backs up fast deflection and Vigilante Vigor on the shield recharge front and makes passive shield gating much more reliable for survivability. For other builds, this Arcane is not necessary. Arcane Concentration, just added with the old piece update, gives Volt a free plus 60% ability duration. Cast Shock, then cast something like Speed or Electric Shield, and you'll get the 60% duration bonus on that ability. Extra duration on buffs like Roar, Zada's Whisper, or Nourish is a huge bonus for comfort. It's not mandatory, but it opens up a lot of flexibility for mods and Archon shards. Arcane Energize is still the go-to if you're struggling with energy. A lot of these builds already cover energy, but Energize is still a great safety net. However, there are other options later on that might push you away from this Arcane. Molt Augmented is amazing on most setups. More ability strength means stronger Shock Trooper, speed, and discharge, and it also plays nicely with weapon platform buffs like Roar and similar Helminth options. Molt Efficiency can be solid since Volt can usually keep his shields topped off, but it's a bit more situational. Its value depends on how much damage you're taking, and sometimes other Arcanes are simply better. I don't run a set combination of Arcanes on Volt. Given his versatility, it's hard to pin down a certain set. That being said, it does make Volt's gameplay and build diversity extremely fun. Weapon-specific arcanes are always great on Volt since he can easily become a dedicated weapons platform. Melee arcanes are great too, but I would avoid Arcane Strike since speed handles melee attack speed buffing already. Also, if you're Eidolon hunting, consider using Arcane Nullifier to shake off magnetic procs. Volt has two options for focus schools, Madurai and Zenurik. Let's begin with Madurai. Volt can abuse Madurai thanks to it granting ability strength bonuses nearly everywhere. Power transfers increase to ability casting speed is nice, but it's only really useful for Helminth abilities or discharge. Shock, speed, and electric shield are all quick to cast, but the bonus is nice regardless. Sling strength is an easy to use 40% bonus to ability strength that can be used by all of Volt's abilities, minus electric shield. The steroid itself makes buffing abilities even stronger for weapon platform setups. Void Strike and Void Fuel are good for reviving when in last stand, but can be further buffed by electric shield. With the old piece update, the operator got a massive increase in lethality, making these two perks more meaningful in broader mission types. Phoenix Talons do not directly help Volt since it affects physical damage, rather than elemental damage. However, it can be useful depending on the weapons being used. In addition, Madurai's Thera Tauron Strike can be upgraded with the Overwhelming Power Focus node, which can increase ability strength by 5% for each enemy hit by the initial strike for 30 seconds. The bonus caps out at 50% strength and stacks on top of Sling Strength for a possible 90% bonus. Zenurik is the focus school all about energy regen, and since the operator got a big offensive boost in the old piece update, Madurai isn't the only default pick anymore. Zenurik actually has room to shine. Energy Pulse makes energy pickups give 50% more energy over 5 seconds. Volt has no channel abilities, so it's basically free value, especially if you're spamming Discharge. Inner Might lets you cast an ability for free but has a 60-second cooldown. It's another solid tool for smoothing out energy droughts. Wellspring plus Hardened Wellspring gives you 5 energy per second and 20% ability strength while you're inside the zone. The best part is that speed, shock trooper, and Helminth buffs like Roar snapshot strength, so you can drop the zone, cast, and keep the benefit. The regen alone can make Blind Rage feel way more reasonable on builds. Zenurik also gets its own Tauron Strike style tome, Lorak, basically a Kamehameha beam that deletes whatever direction you point it. Enemies hit by the beam have a 100% chance to drop an energy orb if they're killed within 10 seconds. And with Spectral Pages, Volt can gain up to 4 pages, each giving plus 10% cast speed, ability strength, duration, and plus 100 max energy. With Boundless Energy maxed, that bonus can scale up to 50% cast speed, strength, and duration. So yeah, long story short, Volt gets almost infinite energy, which means there's basically no reason not to run Blind Rage. Go ham. Volt has a lot of Archon shard flexibility, but for my setup, I chose to use 1 Amber Shard and 4 Crimson Shards. Having 1 Tauforge Amber Shard makes Discharge and other Helminth abilities easier to use, and heavily reduces the risk when casting it in front of enemies. 2 of the 4 Crimson Shards are tuned for ability duration, while the other 2 are for ability strength. Depending on your preference and builds, you can mix and match. I prefer to have a little boost in both for better ease of use and damage output. Now let's quickly cover the weapon choices. Please note that these are my personal favorites and not an exhaustive list. Volt's unique ability to buff weapons to an extreme degree means that tons of weapons are good with him, so please use what you find comfortable, and in fact, just leave it in the comments. I'm always open to try new weapons. First up are the primary weapons, Cedo Prime, Coda Base Assist, and Phantasma Prime. Cedo is a perfect Volt shotgun because it scales harder the more you stack on a target. Its alt-fire glaive spreads status everywhere, and the primary rewards that with huge damage. Shock Trooper and Nourish pile on extra elements so it ramps up fast. Then Electric Shield turns that ramp up into brutal crit damage while you fire safely from cover. Coda Base Assist is great for controlling the room while you stay in motion. The Mites apply nasty statuses for easy priming, and the Range Finisher option helps you pick off priority targets. Speed keeps you flowing between packs, and Electric Shield gives you a safe lane to clean up anything that pushes in while buffing its crit damage. Phantasma Prime is a beam blender that loves extra elemental damage and steady uptime. Drop a shield and sweep lanes with the beams while the crit boost and added electricity damage push its damage through the roof. It feels especially good on Volt because you can reposition constantly without losing pressure. Then there are the secondaries, the Grimoire, Kuvenukor, and Ladum. The Grimoire is a comfy utility pick for Volt. It primes fast with electricity and scales well with the numerous buffs that Volt has access to, and the Alt-Fire Orb makes applying procs effortless. The Tome mods also allow you to squeeze more utility out of your ability focus setups, which fits Volt perfectly. Kuvenukor is still one of the cleanest primers and damage dealers around. The Chaining Beam spreads status across groups with almost no effort, and speed makes it easy to stay on top of spawns when you tag everything. If you build it as a crit weapon, it scales extremely well with Electric Shield. Ladum is a weak point focus nuke that Volt makes safer and more consistent. Electric Shield protects your angle and booster shots, so charging in Karnon feels smooth even in high level content. Roar and Nourish both scale its output hard, and Zada's Whisper can make landing follow-up hits easier while adding another damage layer. Finally, there are melee weapons. There's tons of them, but I just run Inodem, Okina Prime Incarnon, and Praetos. Inodem has great quality of life on Volt. It boosts movement speed while held, and can even add more sprint speed through evolutions, stacking nicely with his second ability. It can also fire projectiles in Incarnon form that are buffed by Electric Shield, which can abuse melee influence for even easier nuking in scaling areas. Okina Prime Incarnon is basically mobility glue to your melee slot, and I think you get the picture. The Incarnon bonuses lean into sprint speed and parkour velocity, which makes Volt repositioning even smoother. Shock Trooper also buffs melee, so you can still get real damage while you zoom around with melee influence. Melee Korean is also a serious contender on this weapon. Praetos is the classic movement stat stick for me. Sprint speed, slide bonuses, and parkour velocity stack on top of speed to make you feel untouchable. I personally do not use melee influence on this, I just use a conventional slash-based build. Try this weapon with melee Korean too for added utility. Unlike other frames, Volt doesn't have a favorite companion. Literally anything will work since his base kit and builds allow him to be flexible. Use whatever your heart desires. I personally stick to my Panzervolk Violet. Can I recommend Volt Prime? Yep, without a doubt. His versatility is unrivaled, and he's just a joy to play. He hasn't had a rework, and he doesn't need one except for his passive maybe. Volt is one of the most flexible frames in game, and he makes almost every weapon feel unfair when you build around his buffs. Shock is cheap, fast, and useful. With Shock Trooper, it turns into a legit damage steroid, letting you stack extra electricity damage on your weapons and on your team, and it pairs perfectly with helmet buffs like Roar, Nourish, or Zada's Whisper when you want to lean fully into weapon damage. Speed is the reason Volt never feels slow or stuck. It makes missions fly by, and it makes melee feel like a blender. It also lets you reposition constantly so you're always fighting on your terms. Electric Shield is still the star of the show. It is protection, and it is a damage amp, and it's the reason Volt can delete things that have no business evaporating that fast, especially when you pair it with crit focused weapons and good positioning. Finally, Discharge is the glue that holds everything together if you choose to keep it on the build. It locks down entire rooms, buys you breathing room in Steel Path, and gives you that clean setup time to drop a shield and start carving. In addition, it still allows you to support the team with Capacitance. Long story short, Volt Prime is a truly timeless frame that scales from casual missions all the way into the nastiest content without ever feeling like dead weight. If you feel like going fast, buffing weapons, and turning a single good angle into a massacre, he is an easy recommendation. Let me know what you guys think about this rework guide. If you have any suggestions or tech I missed, leave them in the comments. As always, thank you all for watching and happy farming. Stay safe and Happy New Year.